Good evening, everyone, and welcome. The time is about 13 minutes to 8, and we're going to go live at 8 o'clock. Until we go live, we're having an informal chat. I see Dr. Johnny Broomberg has joined us. Johnny, welcome. Nice to see you this evening.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
You must be exhausted. We know how busy your life has been between your real day job as well as the stuff you've been doing for the Solidarity Fund. So we really appreciate the time that you're spending with us this evening.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So we have about 1,800 devices registered for tonight, which will probably be between 3,500 and 4,000 people watching us this evening. Johnny, you tell us that most of those will probably be members of your family.
Yeah, I think so.
Welcome, Dr. Makhoana. Welcome to you as well. Fantastic to see you. Your lighting is fantastic. Your camera is amazing. And let's hear some audio and check some audio from you. No, we're not hearing anything at the moment. So you may need to plug that into somewhere. Dina Diamond, while we do that, welcome. Benji Porter, welcome. Great to see you both this evening.
How's it, Howie? Thank you, Howie.
Special shirt for tonight. Is that your?
I'm wearing my Christian Lacroix tonight. Dina, of all people, you should be able to recognize that.
Wow, very impressed. I couldn't see you behind the virtual background.
That's definitely out of my framework. I know humor.
Well, I can't tell you that they say that a change is as good as a holiday. So this evening, I'm in fact broadcasting from our study instead of my TV room where I normally do. I feel like that's like spending 2 weeks in the south of France.
Yeah, how you really are going to get out soon.
Yeah.
And so, Doc, no, still can't hear you yet. You're definitely not on mute. Okay, no, still not hearing you yet. Maybe you want to log off and come back in, or let me mute you and unmute you. Let's see if that works at all. I'm asking to unmute you now. Let's see if we can see anything. If you can unmute. Okay, talk to us. No, I'm afraid still no audio. You may want to log out and come back in. We'll see you when you come back in. Fantastic. So Dina, you joining us this evening to tell us just after 8 o'clock about the show we're busy putting together for Saturday evening. Don't you want to give us some details in the intro?
Absolutely, absolutely. So in our continuity and our continuation of what we had was Women's Month, and also just our storytelling and just telling phenomenal stories about unbelievable people, we will be having a webinar on Saturday evening with three, we might have an extra surprise, three unbelievable women who just show us how inspirational and motivational and just unbelievable they can be. We have got Serene Shapiro, who was the Paralympic swimmer who won a gold medal at the 2008 Olympics. And I mean, her story is just absolutely incredible. And we've also got Kiki Marks on the swimming track, who has actually swum the English Channel. And the two of them actually know each other, which is great. And we have Liat Aaron from the Israel Center, who has been a peacemaker, been involved in the peace process in Israel, knows the side from the Palestinians, from the Israeli side, and just so insightful that these three women have just got stories to tell that are literally gripping and spellbinding. So we're going to have a great evening on Saturday night.
So while we're busy talking about this, a thought just occurred to me. You know Johnny Broomberg is on the screen at the moment, and Lauren Siegel, his wife, who has written about the South African Constitutional Court, but has also written the most remarkable book called Cancer, A Love Story, which is in the bookshelf behind me. would be an amazing person to have, if not this Saturday, certainly one of the storytelling evenings that we have. She's the most amazing human being, the most brilliant author, and her life experiences and her struggle and love affair with cancer is just one of the truly most gripping, beautiful stories you would ever hear.
But so Jonathan, no pressure at all on live camera.
Do you think the Siegel Broombergs come as a package deal?
You don't know us if you ask that, Howard. Definitely not. You're going to have to ask yourself. You're going to have to ask Lauren yourself.
We'll make sure that Dina asks Lauren, if not for the Saturday, then certainly a Saturday coming up. But
I'm sure she'll be happy to do it.
I think I don't know if
she'll be happy to do it.
Benji, I don't know if you've read Lauren's book on the South African Constitution as well. It is a work of genius.
I haven't, but my wife works with Jonathan, and I have heard the story, and she has read the book and is incredibly inspired by both of them, actually. So,
well, you know, when I was in Form 1, Johnny was my head boy, so I feel like I have to show him undue respect.
It's
showing his age.
I don't like the undue part, Howard.
Dr. Makhoana, welcome back. Talk to us, and let's hope we can hear you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Welcome. Fantastic to have you with us.
Okay, fantastic. And no echo so far.
No echo, but it looks like you're in your bedroom. So if the rest of us get a little boring, you can just go have a lie down.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. When we wanted someone in South Africa who really knew the ins and outs of vaccine production, there was only one name that came up, and that was yours. So we're so delighted to have you join us this evening.
That's a lot of pressure, hey?
You know, the pressure should be great. We probably will have approximately 4,000 people watching us this evening. And then these things live on YouTube. So for us, a small webinar is a few thousand people, and a large webinar is 30, 40,000 people. So we're certainly hoping that we think the interest is huge. We think people can't wait to get their hands on a vaccine. There's some people willing to grow an extra ear or limb and go for the Russian vaccine at the moment. But we're hoping that this evening we can actually learn some of that. So a huge welcome. I see we've joined about 355 logins already. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome wherever in the world you actually are. Please tell us where in the world you are. Use the chat button. As you know, we always love to hear from people. And I see we've got people in Cape Town. We've got people in East London, in Sandton, in Jerusalem, in Newlands in Cape Town. We've got Etienne and Aubrey out of Toronto. Welcome. Lovely to see you guys again. I got mocked because I asked how Aubrey's knees were doing during our last webinar. And someone sent me a message and said, how very classic.
Howie, you know, welcome, Dr. Makhoana. You know, you said that a large proportion of the viewers were Johnny's family, but I think the other large representative are the Kohanovitzes and their family, who were significant in assisting us, and we're so grateful to them, Dr. Makhoana. And they just they were so helpful in getting you, and they spoke so highly of you. And so we just want to thank you for making the time, and thank the Kohanovitzes for making the introduction, which was
no problem. There are normally 3 brothers, but I think what is not disclosed that there is actually a 4th, and that's me.
I see nice. Tonight we're joined by people in the Underberg. We've got some people in Norway. We love to have Norwegians. I was in Norway a few years ago. I went to go look at the Northern Lights, and we should actually tell that story in one of our webinars as well. See, we've got people in San Diego, in California. We've got people in Vancouver, more people in Milnerton, lots of people in Cape Town. Where is Himmerville? I see we have some visitors tonight from Himmerville.
It would be a first, and I have no idea. Benji?
So will the people in
No.
Himmerville please tell us where they are, and a welcome to the people from Rondebosch, people in Miami, lots of people in Johannesburg and Cape Town as well. So we're very international, and we often have people watching us in places like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. We're big in Pakistan. We always have people in Brazil, a few in the Caribbean. We've had some Guatemalans, Costa Ricans, Mexicans joining us. So we're really just so delighted that we have people from all over the world who found value in what will tonight be our 48th webinar. Can you believe that, Benji? It seems
No.
like just yesterday that we started this at the beginning of
Yeah.
lockdown.
No,
Guys,
you
I
know,
remember you both had hair when we started.
I had a full head of hair. It was absolutely perfect. You also. But I remember we started, we just wanted to provide some information on COVID. And we thought we'd have 3 medical doctors and Howie. Not enough good things can be said about you, what you've done with this. And the team in the Jewish Report has been remarkable, but led by you, sir, who's the chairman. And I think that we've all learned so much, but in that process, we've seen so many stories and the incredible power of South Africans. And a lot of that's been brought out by you. So it's been one of the greatest journeys I've been on, and I know I've enjoyed it, and I'm sure you have too, hey, Howie?
Absolutely. It's been a huge amount of hard work, but it's been so rewarding. And the most important thing is that while we've had thousands and tens of thousands of people watching us, people have communicated with us. And what we've really gone and done is we've built a virtual community town square. And people come and they chat and they kibitz and they complain and they talk to each other and they have virtual coffees and they listen to musicians and they hear people talking on the street corner. And we've recreated community in a digital format. And that's been just the most rewarding, unbelievable thing to see. You know, at the end of every webinar we do, we literally get hundreds and hundreds of people giving us comments either via email or WhatsApp or via the chat section on Zoom. And it really has made this all absolutely worthwhile, because we think we're serving not just the Jewish community where we started in this process, but I think we're serving the entire South African community, lots of expat South Africans who are tuning in, and people all over the world who found value in the sort of things that we're doing, and some of the remarkable, inspiring stories. So we were all involved in Saturday night. We told the story of Shani Krebs, who spent 18 years in a Thai jail, of Gary Swaden, who survived the tsunami, and he walked us through what it was like to live through and the decision to live during the tsunami as well. And Adam Pantanovitz, whose doctors told him he would never be able to walk again. And today is one of the most successful biomedical engineers in the country expert on artificial intelligence, from someone who had to drop out of school because of the pain that he was in and the humiliation that he went through being unable at that point in time to even work. So those were truly remarkable stories. So a huge welcome as well to the people. I see we've got people in Jerusalem, people in Manoff, people in Sea Point, some people in Miami, people
Nigeria.
in Irvine in the USA. So we love to see you. And I think we've got some people in Washington, DC as well. So it's just such a pleasure to be able to do this on behalf of the South African Jews Report for everyone in South Africa. Dr. Makhoana, have you been on many webinars? Have you spent the last 5 months of lockdown stuck in front of a computer?
Fortunately not, because the vaccine momentum is only picking up now. So we've been working hard behind the scenes and not been on too many webinars. And yeah, you know, we rather be in the labs and everywhere else trying to cook up a vaccine.
Well, you know something, you told us about the 3 Kahanovitz brothers and you're the 4th brother, but given that you're the best looking of all the Kahanovitzes, they really should have put you on all of the webinars rather than themselves.
Yeah. You definitely got the better DNA.
So welcome to the people in Lelucia, in the people in New York, and Daryl says to us, and Toronto, brew. And so, Daryl, I think you've lost your touch. That's not the way we spell brew in South Africa. That sort of brew we are allowed to now drink. I think here we spell it B-R-U.
He was
That's
also
exactly
educated
how
at
it is.
Northview, Daryl, I think. So that explains. He's my alma mater. That's why I can't spell.
Benji, isn't it miraculous that you've made it this far in life?
As a Northview boy, Daryl will tell you it's one of the modern miracles.
Dina, where were you educated, or are you still being educated?
Listen, I'm definitely still being educated.
Yeah.
Most certainly. I was mostly educated in Joburg, Yeshiva College, Boston City Campus, Wits Business School. Continuously learning. I'm a student of life. I love learning. The more I travel, the more I learn.
I was once, Johnny, I don't know if you remember Derek and Gary Labner.
Sure,
but we once went to movies together in Santon, and they asked if there were student discounts. And the person behind the counter looked at both of them, who were clearly way beyond their student years, and said, "What exactly are you studying?" And their response was, "I'm a student of life." And with that, everyone got student discounts.
Especially those in...
That is the truth. We are all students of life. And I think these webinars, have shown us that we are all truly students of life, because no matter how much we think we know, no matter how much we've seen, these webinars honestly have opened up our eyes to so many other stories, to other remarkable individuals. And for me, that's been incredible.
So we're going to go live in approximately 1 minute time. A huge welcome to everyone who's busy watching this evening. We have literally thousands of people who've joined in. We love the fact that we've got people in the Eastern Cape. I see the Zettlers have joined us, and I presume the Zettlers are in Paarl or Stellenbosch, because I've gone past the Zettlers and bought strawberries from them on many, many occasions. And good evening to Wendy Mechanic. Lovely to have you join us this evening. So we will go live in 1 minute. We have got the most remarkable evening planned for all of you. And I think this is the most important topic that we could actually address at the moment. It's the sort of thing that people are sitting around dinner tables, wearing their masks, talking about. And hopefully we can actually give some very practical answers. So a huge welcome as well to Professor Helen Rees, who I'm sure has had every single one of her evenings over the last few months completely ruined by people like us who are clamoring for the sort of advice and information that she actually has. So the time has just gone exactly 2 minutes past 8, and on behalf of the South African Jewish Report, I want to welcome everyone this evening. Tonight is in fact the 48th webinar that we've done during lockdown, and it is such a privilege and a pleasure on behalf of the South African Jewish Report to bring this to you. I'm joined this evening by my vice chair, who is Benji Porter. Welcome, Benji. Good evening. Fantastic to have you with us.
Hi, Howie. Thank you so much. We've been so excited about this panel, and thanks so much to all the guests. This is a real honor for us.
And also Dina Diamond, who is also one of the directors of the South African Jewish Report as well. And while you say hello, Dina, I'm going to turn off the cameras of both Johnny and Dr. Morena Makhoana, and we'll come back to them in a few minutes. So good evening, Dina.
And good evening to you. Again, always wonderful to be on our webinars.
So fantastic to have so many international people who've joined us this evening, so many local people who've joined us this evening. And we want to really get off, first of all, by talking about the latest edition of the South African Jewish Report. You see it behind me. There's this amazing picture on the front cover of the chief rabbi, in fact, having his temperature taken as he goes back to shul. It looks almost like someone's pointing a gun at his head, but don't worry, that's just a temperature gun, not a real gun. And so the edition is out. You can go to Pick and Pay, Woolworths, Dis-Chem, your local shop, your garage shop to pick up a copy of the Jewish Report. Or alternatively, we're also delivering to townhouses and blocks of flats as well. But if you don't want to wait for a hard copy, you can go online and get your copy of the South African Jewish Report. All you have to do is go to www.sajr.co.za. SAJR obviously stands for South African Jewish Report, and you will be able to pick up your copy online of the South African Jewish Report right there. You can look at the individual articles, or alternatively, you can in fact download the full edition as well. We want to thank tonight Danny Kadar. Danny Kadar is on controls. Danny, your camera is off, but you can wave at us if you want to. Danny, welcome. I see you've dressed up for this evening, looking very sharp there in your clean white shirts. So a huge thank you to you. And we're sure tonight we will have many, many questions. And please look at the bottom of your screen. You will see there's a chat button. If you want to chat amongst yourselves, please use the chat button. If you want to ask any of our panelists any questions, and I see we've already got questions busy coming in, please use that and we'll make sure your questions are in fact posed through to members of the panel. If you're watching on YouTube, then please post the questions into YouTube. Benji and I will be flipping between Zoom and YouTube, looking for your questions in the comment section on YouTube as well. So thank you for everyone for joining us. And Dina, very briefly, let's talk about what we have planned for Saturday evening.
All right, so to continue our wonderful storytelling, our absolute stories of motivation, of inspiration, we have found 3 phenomenal, unbelievable women who will be sharing their stories with us. We've got Shireen Sapiro, who was the Paralympic medal winner at the Paralympics in 2008. And I mean, her story is just blows your mind completely. We've got Kiki Marks, whose determination is literally unsurpassed, and she crosses the English Channel with it. And we have got Liat Aaron, who is from the Israel Center, who has literally been in the trenches on the side of making peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And they are just phenomenal people who have got wonderful stories. They're so insightful, and I think it's just going to be an amazing evening.
Benji, you said to me earlier that in fact there are more people who have climbed Mount Everest than have swum the English Channel. That's how big a feat Kiki Marks's feat is.
Howie, it's a completely remarkable achievement to swim the English Channel. That stat I certainly have seen verified. I think, I don't want to take some of her story, but what makes it so profound, she swam in Israel, in the Dead Sea, to show the effects of climate change. But also she wasn't immediately successful across the English Channel. And Dina will hear more about that later. But
absolutely. But I think all of her stories, when she puts her mind to something, she does it. And that is just absolute determination and so admirable.
Yeah.
Remarkable. Dina, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate that. You're going to now go back into the audience. Benji, we're going to ask you to put your microphone a little closer to your mouth so we can hear you a little better. But Benji, you know that we launched last week a shofar blowing competition. And in fact, you and I have a bottle of whiskey bet over who will in fact have the best shofar blowing. Your contestant, how is he doing?
Howie, to tell you the truth, I'm getting nervous. I chatted to him this week, and he went into a deep explanation of how he purchased his shofar, and then how his shofar is a quality sound and not a quantity sound, and he's nervous. So I think I might have backed the wrong jockey on this one, which I'm a bit worried about.
Well, Benji, I went to the guy that I've put money on and a bottle of whiskey on, who is Rabbi Chazdan, who has been practicing the entire week. And not only that, I've offered him half my bottle of whiskey I plan on winning from you if we can in fact win. So for those of people who don't know what we're actually talking about this evening, it is Jewish tradition that during this month, which is the Hebrew month of Elul, that we blow a ram's horn or any sort of animal horn. And in fact, we do that in anticipation that we're heading into the Jewish New Year, which is in a few weeks' time. And it is a call to prayer. It's a call to self-reflection. It's a call for people to awaken to the fact that we're about to have a new year ahead of us. And so we launched the competition last week. We've had lots of entrants. We've played 3 so far. Tonight, we're going to play you a few others. And if you can blow the shofar, we want you to email us a copy of a video of you doing the 4 notes of the shofar, the tekiah, the shvarim, the trua, and the tekiah gedola. And that's, we're going to show you very quickly a 2-minute video of the latest entrants that we've had. And we'll show you more on, in fact, Saturday night.
Okay.
So in fact, those were the beautiful sounds of Miriam Makeba singing Erev Shel Shoshanim, Evening of Roses. So Benji, lots of competition ahead, hey?
Definitely. I'm worried about my jockey, but I'm going to maybe send him for some like sports psychiatry, like to get him in the mood and to be able to perform under this kind of pressure,
So we'd like to know from you in the chat. Please let us know who you think was the best shofar blower that we played you this evening. And before we begin, we're so happy that Thirst Bar Services are one of our sponsors for this evening. The guys from Thirst we had on a few days ago. Not only are they just a remarkable company, not only do they provide amazing services through to people, but during the period of lockdown, the guys from Thirst were just unbelievable in helping my can in transporting food into Kliptown in Soweto. They were involved in a number of NGOs, just helping them out during this period, shipping, using their trucks, their staff when there was no other work, using the facilities that they had to ship food into the townships to help those in far greater need than themselves. So to Thirst, a huge thank you, and let's see your advert. Alcohol is back. We're not there yet, but the good times will return. So why not get whatever you need from Thirst's online store? The best thing about it, instead of schlepping to the shops, you'll receive delivery within 24 hours. Get your orders in fast because who knows when the next ban is coming. Details in the chat. And the best thing yet, now that events are open up to 50 people, take advantage of Thirst 50% off bar hire for your wedding, birthday, bar mitzvah or next celebrations. Details in the chat. Fantastic. Well, good evening to everyone. I'm going to ask everyone to, in fact, start their cameras. We're joined by the most remarkable, illustrious panel. Benji, Vice Chair of the South African Jewish Report. Fantastic to have you with us this evening. Johnny Broomberg, we go way, way back. You know, I've been chasing you for weeks to bring you onto one of our panels. So fantastic to have you this evening. Professor Helen Rees, we're going to hear from you soon, and Johnny Broomberg is going to do a formal introduction, but you are the country's leading expert when it comes to issues of vaccines and many other things. You're chair of SAPRA, so we can't get any devices approved without you're okay. A huge welcome to you. And Dr. Morena Makhoana, you're the one who's going to tell us how we're going to get our hands on a locally manufactured vaccine. So with that, Johnny, thank you so much for joining us and helping us walk through this evening. You're going to introduce Professor Helen Rees, and after that, Helen is going to take us through a presentation. We're going to speak to Dr. Makhoana, and then we're going to come back for a lot of questions. If you do have any questions, please use the chat functionality in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, or if you are on YouTube, please just post in the comments, and we'll make sure Benji or myself pick up those comments and bring them across to the side.
Thanks, Howard and Benji. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. And Helen, welcome to this webinar. And thank you again for so generously giving us of your incredibly precious time. We are very grateful, as always. Let me introduce Professor Helen Rees to our audience this evening. This is the second time I've had the privilege of introducing Helen. We're old friends, but I don't often get to introduce her to a big audience, and I enjoy it. I enjoy embarrassing her. And Helen, I think the words I like to use is honestly a national treasure of our country. She's one of the world's most renowned public health scientists. She's an expert in both policy and the science of HIV, of vaccines, now of COVID. She's made a huge contribution to the world's knowledge base on HIV, going right back to the early days of that epidemic, and has led a large number of very important trials to do with HIV and AIDS in our country that's contributed to the science of treatment and AIDS and prevention. And she has continued that work as our country has had to confront this appalling global pandemic. Helen is a major player in a number of global advisory bodies, including in the WHO around COVID. She chairs a number of international scientific panels, not only related to COVID, but to many other issues of HIV, AIDS, and public health. She is not only a professor at our own Wits University, but also at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and an honorary professor at the University of Cambridge. She's had numerous local and international awards, both from the British government and our own government. So Helen, it's as always a pleasure to have you. Thanks for joining us. I think you're going to share a presentation with us on your perspectives on a vaccine for COVID-19. And hopefully then we will have a chance, us and the audience, to ask you a few questions as well. So I'll hand over to you, Helen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for this invitation, everybody. And what Johnny didn't tell you was that he and I, or he tried to persuade me, or he got me to do some work with him many, many years ago on costing primary healthcare services. And I was hopeless at it, and I really didn't like it. And he was the expert, but he was very kind to me anyway, nonetheless. But that clearly wasn't my forte. But I've got a set of slides. I don't know if we could start to share the slides. Lovely. So I was asked to talk to you this evening about the race for a COVID vaccine, and I had some sort of instructions to say, I should sort of give a little bit of background about why a vaccine, what a vaccine, and so on. So I'm going to try and walk you through a bit of a story about where we've got to. And I think the colleagues there will be advancing my slides. Next slide, please.
Not so easy to advance your slides, so I'm going to share them again in a different format.
Okay. I was going to say that didn't look like one of my slides there, but that's fine.
Great. Can you see that?
Yes, I can see that fine.
Perfect.
So we can't go into can we go into the slide view? Or is that a problem?
The slide view is currently not allowing me to change slides. So
okay.
I will try. There we go. Okay.
There we go. Okay. So that's fine. Sorry for that, everybody. So the question is, what have we learned so far? And I'm going to take us back on a little bit of a history walk so that we can see some of the lessons we've learned through outbreaks and pandemics. Next slide. And I'm taking us right back, and some of you might remember, smallpox eradication. So far, smallpox is the only human infectious disease that's we've managed to eradicate. The last case was in Somalia in 1977, and WHO managed to achieve this with many partners through what was called a ring vaccination strategy. And this is a strategy where they gave a vaccine to an infected patient, not to the infected patient, they found an infected patient, and then they gave the vaccine to the contacts and the contacts of that patient. That was called ring vaccination. So just hang on to that thought, because I'm going to come back to it. And by 1980, the world had eradicated smallpox, and we're now trying to do the same thing with polio. Next slide, please. So let's move on a bit and then look at some lessons that we learned from pandemic influenza. If you remember, it was called swine flu, H1N1, and it occurred in 2009. And this was the first pandemic we'd had in 40 years. The death estimates varied there between 150 to over 500,000, but nonetheless, the mortality wasn't as high as we had initially feared when the pandemic was first declared. But the H1N1 virus continues to circulate seasonally, and it's incorporated into our seasonal vaccine. Now, one of the problems here, so second lesson, is vaccine access. So a small group of rich countries at the time, we developed a vaccine quite quickly, but an entire vaccine stockpile for the world was purchased. There were a few donations to poorer countries, and WHO put up a small stockpile. I was on a committee then, and it suddenly dawned on us on this WHO global committee that there were no vaccines for the African region. However, South Africa received vaccines months after the pandemic had peaked and was on the decline, and many healthcare workers weren't even interested in receiving it. Next slide. We move on to Ebola, and the first case of Ebola was recorded in 1976, and still until today we're still having outbreaks of Ebola. But until recently, they were contained by just sensible public health measures and infection control measures. That was until 2014, where if you look at West Africa, we had this enormous and unprecedented outbreak of Ebola in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Next slide. And the world in response to that said, my goodness, the only thing that we can do here, apart from getting better treatments, we really, in terms of prevention, have to have a vaccine. So there were a number of different proposals to have vaccine studies, but the point was that the world wasn't ready. We hadn't thought through how do we do these kinds of vaccine studies in a hurry. There weren't vaccines ready to go on the shelf. There weren't vaccine designs, trial designs. And the only trial design that managed to get into the field in time was the one at the top, the Ebola Sasufi. And that strategy was exactly the same strategy as used for smallpox. It was a ring vaccination strategy where they immunized contacts and contacts of infected people, which was anything between about 70 to 120 people in those two rings. Next slide. So this is what it would look like. You have an index case and you have the intimate contacts, and then you have the contacts beyond it. And that was the strategy used. And it was really dug out of the annals of history, looking back to smallpox. Next slide. And it was effective. What they did was they either gave the contacts an early and immediate vaccination. You can see in the dotted line below where it says early, or they delayed it by 21 days, which was beyond the incubation period of Ebola. In the early group, there were no cases of Ebola, and in the delayed group, there were 16 cases. And it was concluded, and the vaccine has been licensed as it being effective against Ebola. So we learned there about the importance of readiness in terms of having some vaccines to go into the field, but also having your clinical trials thought out and designed and approved before time, because when a pandemic comes or an outbreak, it's too late. Next slide. However, having done this, we've still got a problem. We've got 2 licensed Ebola vaccines now, but we still, if we had a major outbreak, we would still have constraints in global supply. So similar to pandemic flu, supply is an issue. Next slide. So this is where we are at the moment with COVID-19, over 23 million cases worldwide, over 800,000 deaths. And in terms of impact on poverty and economies, we're losing $375 billion from global economies every month. Next slide. So clearly, when we sat back, there are two things that needed to happen and happen extremely quickly. We needed new therapeutic interventions. First of all, to help the human host, and second, to hamper the virus. Next slide. So if we look at helping the human host first, well, how can we do that? Well, we can bolster the host immunity. And there are different ways we can do that, and I'll come back to that. We can alter conditions for viral entry by giving drugs, for example, that are there in the body and can impact on that. We can prevent excessive immune and inflammatory responses, and some of you will have heard people talking about the use of steroids now in treatment. And we can oppose the hypercoagulable state, which is one of the big complications, blood clotting. So we can help the human host on that side, and we can hamper the virus by interfering with it in lots of different levels in which it acts within the host cells. Well, what we're going to talk about now is how do we bolster that immunity, the help the human host side. Next slide. So there are two, very simply put, there are two different types of immunity. The first is called innate immunity, which is, if you like, a sort of generic general immunity that's there with all of us from a young age and responds to a wide range of pathogens when they come in. It's got lots of cells that will attack a new pathogen that comes into the body, and that's there, and it's not specific for any one infection. However, if you're exposed, for example, to measles, your body would respond to that and say, I've been exposed and I'm going to develop an immune response, and then I'm going to have adaptive immunity. This is an immunity that gives me memory. And so if I see measles again, that kicks in very rapidly and it's primed specifically for measles and it will respond. And with adaptive immunity, there are two different ways we can do it. Naturally acquired immunity, and the commonest way that you can imagine, of course, is that we get infections. And when we get infections, we produce antibodies and special white cells, and we can fight off that infection. And that will give us acquired adaptive immunity. So when we see that infection again, the body kicks into action. The other way is passive, and this is where antibodies pass from a pregnant woman to a baby. On the other side, in terms of adaptive immunity, there's artificially acquired, and the active side of that is vaccines. So we introduce an antigen that is a signal for a particular infection into the body through a vaccine, and the body responds in the same way to an infection and produces antibodies and different types of white cells. The other way, and you've probably heard about this recently, is passive, where we actually get antibodies from people who've had an infection and we introduce them into other people through injection. So we're going to focus on the artificially acquired active adaptive immunity and what we do when we give a vaccine. Next slide. So when we give a vaccine, we activate these adaptive immunity cells. And there are two big, broad sorts. And this is about as complicated scientifically as I'm going to get. So there are two big sorts of responses that happen. One is antibodies that are produced from cells called B cells, and they block infection. And the other group are called T cells, and they act in different ways, but they also kill infected cells. And once you've got this adaptive immune response, the memory kicks in, and if you see that infection again, the immune response kicks into action. And this is what we're trying to do with a COVID vaccine. Next slide. So how do we develop? What are the processes of developing a vaccine? Well, first of all, you need to assess the need and the potential market, because you can have a neglected disease, but if it's in very poor countries and very narrow geographical areas, there might not be a commercial market, and that's where public health institutions such as the Gates Foundation would tend to come in. So you first of all assess the need, and then you have to say, is this one like an HPV vaccine where you're going to have a big market and a global market in the North and South, or is it really a niche vaccine, and who's going to fund that development? And then you go into basic discovery, research and development, and non-clinical testing in the laboratory, where you do all sorts of lab tests and then animal tests as well. And once you're happy that you've got a candidate vaccine that looks like it might do the job against the pathogen that you're looking at, in this case, COVID, then you apply to the regulatory authority. In South Africa, it would be SAHPRA, in the US, it's the FDA. And you apply to do clinical trials, which I'm sure you've all heard of. And you do go through the clinical trial cascade. I'll briefly show you that. And then if you have a successful outcome, you apply for licensure to the regulatory authority. And importantly, in vaccines, even if you've done studies, which you'll have to do with thousands of people in the large phase 3 trials, because a vaccine, and particularly a new vaccine, you don't know whether you might get an obscure side effect, perhaps 1 in a million. And therefore you do very strict post-licensure monitoring, particularly of new vaccines, because you might not pick up every safety signal, even with thousands and thousands of people participating in trials. Next slide. So how long does this take? And this takes, if you think about that paradigm I just described to you, the first part, where you're in the laboratory and in animal studies, can take about up to 2 years. And then you go into these phases of clinical trials. And this is the long part. You can see phase 1, small numbers of patients to look at is the vaccine safe and does it work? Phase 2, larger numbers of patients, goes into the hundreds and says, is the vaccine safe? Is it immunogenic? And then phase 2B, you're usually in populations which will need the vaccine by then, many more participants. You're looking at safety again of the vaccine. Is it immunogenic? Does it stimulate that immune response you want to see? And then you're starting to look at whether or not it works. And then you go into these massive phase 3 studies, which are going to be tens and tens of thousands of people. I think 30,000 people for the Oxford vaccine in the US and 10,000 people in the UK. So many thousands of people will participate. And that's where you really are asking, does this vaccine work? And in thousands of people, is it safe? And then you've got licensure. So this whole thing can take between 6 to 12 years. And that's not very helpful if you have a pandemic. Next slide. So after I showed you the Ebola outbreak in 2014, which went on for 2 years. So after that, and noting how long it takes to develop vaccines and the unpreparedness that we had in response to that Ebola vaccine outbreak to develop a vaccine, this was set up called the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation, CEPI, and it's a publicly funded, a massive billion-dollar international organization. And its aim is to accelerate the development of vaccines against emerging infectious diseases and to enable equitable access to all populations. Next slide. So the idea is to speed up preparedness so that you have advanced access. You're not starting to try and invent things at the time, but you have advanced access to safe, effective vaccines against emerging infectious diseases. That we can accelerate the research and the development and the use of vaccines during outbreaks, and that this response is sustainable and will ensure equitable distribution. So these are the objectives of CEPI. Next slide. And the idea is that by doing this and thinking about this after the Ebola outbreak, that we were going to bring down this traditional paradigm of vaccine development up to 12 years, right down to 12 to 18 months. You can see that you have consolidated both the preclinical and the clinical, and you're overlapping the clinical, and you're looking to really roll out with ideally in an 18-month period. Next slide. So CEPI's job was to say, where are there diseases that have got outbreak or pandemic potential, and can we start developing vaccines for them? So these were the 5 diseases on the left that we started to look at. Lassa, MERS, you might have heard of. That's another coronavirus that had about a 10% mortality, but was more confined to China and Hong Kong. Nipah, MERS was confined to Saudi Arabia, and it was related to camels. Nipah, Rift Valley fever, and chikungunya. You might never have heard of any of those, but these are all pathogens that exist and can cause outbreaks. But importantly, and this is what we're going to talk about now, one of the things that CEPI looked at was what was called disease X, as has WHO and many other research institutions. And disease X is a disease that we don't yet know about. And so the idea was, can you create the platform for a vaccine, even if you don't know what disease X is going to be? So how do we define disease X? Next slide. So WHO said, this is what we're worried about. This is disease X, and it's going to be caused by pathogen X. And what is pathogen X? Well, it's an infectious agent that we don't currently know about. We don't know about this agent. It's just like COVID-19 a year ago. We didn't know about it. But it's an agent that has got epidemic or pandemic potential, And when it hits us, as we've seen with COVID, that we don't have medical countermeasures. It's thought before this happened, it was guessed that it would be respiratory spread, that it would be easily transmissible, there would be rapid global spread and a high case fatality. All of those things are true for COVID. We're perhaps fortunate that the case fatality rate isn't as high as MERS or the original SARS. And then the other thing that WHO has looked at is where are we most likely, what's most likely to cause this disease X pandemic? And these were the things they listed: antibiotic resistance, climate change, overpopulation and urbanization, and changing ecologies and encroaching into wild areas. These are called, this will precipitate the jump of infections from animals to humans, which is what's happened with COVID-19, where we assume at the moment that this was a jump from bats into humans. And it relates to the changing ecology and it relates to urbanization. Next slide. So what we did in CEPI, and I'm saying we because I chair their scientific committee. So what we did was we said, okay, here we've got to think about disease X and pathogen X, because this might be the next pandemic, as it's turned out to be. And so we asked, and we got inventors, if you like, but that different, both commercial and small biotechs and academic institutions, we gave grants to them, and they developed some of these platforms. On the left are a list of 4 platforms. They're called vaccine platforms that we know about already. These are things that we've already got vaccines. They exist for whole inactivated viruses, live attenuated protein subunits, and virus-like particles. On the right is a list, and these are new. These are new ideas and new platforms, some of which, like DNA and RNA and antigen-presenting viruses, cells rather, they don't exist as vaccines at the moment. These are new technologies. So CEPI invested in these platforms, and the idea is a bit like having a vacuum cleaner where you've got different heads for different functions, that you could take off one head, so you could have a vaccine that's perhaps existing and is used for something like, say, HPV. So you could take out one head and you could fit on another. So if you had pathogen X and you managed to identify it, and then you got the genetic sequence, you could rapidly adapt one of these platforms and plug in pathogen X and develop vaccines. Next slide. And why did we want so many different platforms? You saw that there were 8 things that I listed there, and just look at the top. Here are the vaccine platforms on the left, but because they have different characteristics. Now, one of the things in a pandemic that you want ideally is a single dose vaccine, because going back to find people, say, 28 days later is going to be difficult, and you want something that you hope is going to kick in quickly after 1 dose. In fact, most of the vaccines in clinical trials at the moment are 2 doses. So some different vaccine types and platform types are more likely to be single dose. And speed is very important. If you look at speed, this is how long do you think it's going to take you to develop this vaccine and manufacture it? Now you can see in this list here under speed that this DNA and RNA vaccines that are in development now and in clinical trials, they can be manufactured quickly. And that is, again, in a pandemic, very important, but they have never been made into a vaccine before. So you win some and you lose some when you weigh up all these pros and cons. Next slide. So in January of this year, when the Wuhan outbreak was being reported, I was telling you about, the Scientific Advisory Committee met to say, should we be diverting funds to invest in a new vaccine for COVID-19? And one of the quotes from that meeting, next, was this: even if this isn't pathogen X, perhaps we should do a dry run. At that stage, there hadn't been any human-to-human transmission in China. And so we agreed to invest money nonetheless to see, just in case this was going to be pathogen X, and we invested in a series of vaccines and early vaccine development. Next slide. This is what we first invested in, and that number has now gone up. But you can see that what we did was we took different technology platforms, which would have different speed to being manufactured. And we took a variety of things, because one technology platform fails, another might succeed. So this is how we developed the portfolio. There, however, are many, many more vaccines now in development, not only CEPI, but many international sponsors and commercial interests are now developing vaccines. Next slide. So in fact, we've now got over 200 vaccines under development and 31 in clinical trials. But we're worried about something, you might have heard this expression, vaccine nationalism. What does that mean? It means that there will be an unprecedented demand for any vaccine that's effective. And the demand will outstrip supply for at least 12 to 18 months. Richer countries will be able now, and this is already happening, as you probably heard, making bilateral deals with developers to cover their entire populations. And the risk will be that we have a repeat of the swine flu vaccine supply, where there's nothing left for low middle income countries or countries like South Africa that are self-purchasing but aren't big financial heavyweights. Next. So in response to this, the WHO and groups like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and UNICEF and CEPI and Gavi, which distributes vaccines, all got together. And they said we need to accelerate all of the technology development for COVID. And there were 3 pillars they developed. One is vaccines. One is for diagnostics, because we need to be able to test rapidly and screen populations rapidly for infections. And therapeutics. We need to be able to treat better, but also have other drugs that we can use to prevent infection. But I'm talking today about the vaccines pillar. And if you look underneath there, the vaccines pillar is called COVAX. And there are 3 partners, CEPI, who I've been talking about, who are responsible for the development of vaccines and manufacturing downstream. The World Health Organization is responsible for policy and allocation of vaccines. And Gavi is responsible for procurement and delivery at scale. But if we're going to do all of this, we need to be able to fund it. Otherwise, we are going to find, once again, that the richer countries will be consuming most of the vaccine available. So the COVAX facility, which is an innovative funding idea, was developed to complement and support all of this. Next. So the COVAX facility is a financing instrument, and it's very innovative, but the principle behind it was to say, if we leave things as they are, we won't get equitable global distribution of vaccines. So we want a facility, a finance facility, that will ensure that no country or territory is left without access to a future vaccine. That we want to be able to guarantee in the first instance that when we do have vaccines available, that every country who participates through this mechanism will be guaranteed 20% of their population's needs through this mechanism. And that this financing instrument should be open to all economies, rich and poor, and that there will be upfront financing, and that will secure the manufacturers with a volume guarantee. And that will also mean that because manufacturers will have large volumes, that we can negotiate, certainly during the acute phase of the pandemic, minimal return on investment. It also allows us to pull in a diverse portfolio of vaccine candidates, as many of these candidates might not work. So if you look on the right-hand side of that flow diagrams, the way that we're trying to do this is to pull in the poorest countries of the world, about 100 countries that are supported by international donors, and that the international donors with the countries would put money into this facility, but also self-financing countries like South Africa, to try and pull in self-financing countries, rich and less rich, to put money in up front, and then all of this will flow. And this is the idea of this, and we're pushing very hard at the moment. Next slide. The problem is we need 100 billion, and we need people by the end of this month. We need countries' commitments. So this is what we're trying to secure. This is how we would secure access. Next slide. So if we can do this and pull this off, it will mean that we'll have doses for each country in the world's population who participates in this for 20% of their population, that will have an active and diverse portfolio of vaccines, and vaccines will get out quickly. This will allow us to stop the acute phase of the pandemic in any second waves and third waves, and also importantly to rebuild economies. Next slide. So just let me leave you with a couple of other thoughts. That's all very well. So we've got the vaccine, we're trying to sort out access, we're trying to make sure even the poorest countries will have access. But now we are only going to look on the right-hand side of this slide. We think by 2021, if we're lucky, by the middle or by the end, we might have enough vaccines worldwide to give 3% to every country's population. Now, can you imagine we've got 3%, we're sitting in South Africa or wherever you're sitting. Who do you give the vaccine to? Do you go for number one, which is to reduce the most vulnerable, so you stop death? Or do you go for number two, healthcare workers? You want to preserve health services. Do you go for three and stop local outbreaks so that you can stop transmission? Do you try and stop number four and national and regional spread? Do you try and give it to people that secures the economy and makes the economy stable? So who would you give the vaccine to? And this is a part of what is going on at the moment. Lots of modeling, lots of thinking to try and work out how we would prioritize limited supplies of vaccine, probably for the next at least 18 months to 2 years. Next slide. So just to leave you with this thought, when you have something new, you're answering questions and asking questions all the time. And the answers literally change from week to week. So we still don't really know enough about animal reservoirs, the epidemiology, the transmission. We don't know why some people respond so severely to the infection and others are completely asymptomatic. If we get an immune response, a natural immune response, we don't know how long that will last. And that obviously is important for vaccine understanding. We don't know how long people will tolerate wearing masks in different communities and all of the other social distancing and other requirements. We still need better therapeutics. We don't know properly. We haven't got the best tools yet by any means to treat infection. And we don't know if vaccines will work. And we are trying our best, but we need to raise a lot of voices if we're going to have global equity in terms of access. Next slide. So leave you with this thought, and this is really true about COVID. We are only safe if we are all safe. We can't have some countries thinking that they can immunize an entire population because they won't be able to. Many people won't take it. Others might not be eligible to take it, such as older people. That means that many of their populations are still not going to be protected in terms of their own immunity. And if we have a continent left behind, as we did with the H1N1 pandemic flu with the African region, then this virus will continue to circulate. So we are only safe if the world is safe. Thank you so much.
Helen, thank you so much. That was unbelievable. It was so informative. There are questions rolling in all over the place, many of them very practical questions about things like costing and affordability and whether it will be for one strain or multiple strains. But we're going to come back to you in about 10 minutes time, and we're going to start addressing all of those questions that have come up during your initial talk. So a huge thank you to you. What we're going to be doing during this evening as well is we've prepared a number of polls with questions, many of which you've touched on this evening, to try and understand what people are thinking. So we have 4 polls to ask tonight, and I'm going to start with our first poll. Danny, if you could bring it up onto the screen. We know, for example, that there are 2 tests taking place in South Africa at the moment, vaccine trials. And there have been requests for people to volunteer for a vaccine trial, and we want to know how open people are to suggesting. So for those people on Zoom, you see a window open in front of you, and the question is, would you be willing to have a trial phase 3 vaccine yourself? And your options are, I'm ready for my first shot right now, tomorrow. I'll wait till it's proven effective, or I'm sure that the vaccine will be worse than even COVID. And we must have at least one anti-vaxxer watching who would prefer that option. So we're going to leave it on for about 20 more seconds. We'll ask you, if you are on Zoom, to please vote, and we're going to share those results with you before we go to a very quick ad break, and then we're going to come back and talk about vaccine production in South Africa before we start answering your questions. And just a reminder to everyone, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you're on Zoom, please use it to post any questions to Professor Rees, or if you're on YouTube, please put it into the comment section, and Benji will go in and have a look at the questions that are on Zoom as well. So I'm going to end polling now and share the results with you. An interesting 28% of people watching say they're ready for their vaccine trial shot tomorrow, which is very interesting because I understand we've been struggling a little to get volunteers for our vaccine trials. 71% of people say they would prefer to wait until it's proven effectively, and 2 people do not believe in vaccines at all. So very interesting results there. And before we go on to our next section, we want to thank Mantis. Mantis have probably been our strongest supporters right through the way. And they provide, in the same way that we're providing security in terms of vaccine, and that's the process that Helen has been talking about, they've been providing physical security within South Africa. So Danny, please show us the ad. So a big thank you to Mantis. Now, Benji, you've been talking to Dr. Morena Makhoana. You've been doing lots of research about vaccine production in South Africa. Maybe you kick off with the first question.
Dr. Makhoana, again, I want to thank you for making time. I want to thank Selwyn and Martin Carnivert, who actually spent some time with me this morning, bringing me up to speed on the vaccine production. And they say you're completely passionate about it, and that in immunization, and it's been your life's work. So it's a great honor for us to have you. Maybe you can first give us a bit of a background, a brief background into Biovac, because it's quite a remarkable story.
Thanks. Yeah, so Biovac is a company that's our facilities are based in Cape Town, but we have offices in Johannesburg. And just to put in context who Biovac is in the context of the world, is that on the African continent, there are only 4 manufacturers, so Biovac being one of them. We have another entity in Senegal that's only producing one vaccine called yellow fever vaccine. We have some limited production in Egypt and very, very small production in Tunisia. Now, this is on a continent of 1 billion people. Now, relative to the likes of China, who have over 25 vaccine manufacturers just in one country, and India, who has about 10 or 15. And so there's a lot more vaccine production happening elsewhere but the African continent. So in actual fact, Biovac was the vision of the South African government in the late 90s to re-establish vaccine manufacture, because there was vaccine manufacture from the 60s, but all of that had essentially died down. So it was revived in the form of a public-private partnership, and to essentially, restart vaccine manufacture. So we've been around since 2003, which sounds like a long time, but we're actually a baby in vaccine terms. Many large vaccine companies have been there for decades. So this is who we are. We are getting our first vaccine going through in September, and we can talk a little bit about COVID vaccine, but we've been building momentum, raising funds, attracting foreign direct investments. And so in a nutshell, that's who we are. We're 350 people strong, mainly a biotech company, and proudly South African.
It's great to hear about a public-private partnership, which on many of these webinars, it's been painted by the brain power, that's the future of South Africa. So that's fantastic to hear. Maybe you can talk, just for the layman, like myself, what sort of capacity do you have when it comes to vaccine production in terms of our population? I understand in the continent, but in terms of South African population, what's your capacity?
Yeah. So, to simplify things, vaccines, I think it's good that Helen at least laid the platform that, once we have one word called a vaccine, these are using very different platforms. So it depends what you're talking about. Whether you're talking about viral vaccines, you're talking about bacterial. And I think it was quite clear that even within the viral world, you have many different platforms. So as we establish ourselves, we needed to pick where do we actually start. We know we're South African, we don't have deep pockets. So how do we actually start putting this vaccine manufacturing capacity together? So, in Silicon Valley, in other parts of the world, people start with R&D, there's deep capital, there's high risk. We obviously don't have that appetite, nor the appetite for risk in this country. So what we started doing is just to establish basic distribution, went on to packaging and labeling, and now getting into sterile manufacture and going to be building capacity for what is called active pharmaceutical ingredient, or what is called drug substance in the future. So we've been ramping up slowly, going up, and obviously there are many vaccines out there, mainly for children, but obviously adult vaccines. So, and not one company can essentially manufacture vaccines for its entire population. Pfizer being an American company can't manufacture for the whole of our Americans. But just in terms of general capacity, so Biovac has two facilities. So one that it can produce in vials, and one that it can produce in pre-filled syringes. In pre-filled syringes, we can churn out about 15 million doses. So we can essentially vaccinate 15 million people on our pre-filled syringe line. But on our vial line, because it's a multi-dose, and maybe to simplify it, it's like taking a small cup versus a big cup. A cup is a cup, but sometimes you have a small cup versus a big cup. So when you talk about single dose, essentially you're getting one shot out of a vaccine, and out of that we can do 15 million doses. If we do multi-dose, which is many more vaccines, we certainly can ramp up to about 30 million doses. So that just gives you a perspective. And this is on the platforms that Biovac can be able to manufacture. I think Helen showed that there are many different platforms. Other people can do this platform, others can do that platforms. So the numbers I'm just churning out is certainly on the platforms that we can be able to do.
And are we in the conversation at the moment for the COVID vaccine? Are you talking, is South Africa talking to the right people in terms of actually the manufacturing? It was a brilliant presentation by Professor Rees, but in terms of the brutal fact of manufacturing.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, and I think, she laid a lot of the foundation on and a lot of context in that, let's talk firstly about the South African government in terms of its choices. So I think she's explained that one of the choices that the South African government has is to purchase vaccines out of this pool, that Gavi and CEPI would have created. So that's one angle. We can, as a country, have direct deals, as an option. But I think at the moment is to rather go into this pool. So from a purchasing perspective. But let's talk about manufacturing in terms of now, how does manufacturing now add up, if the South African government is going to buy from this pool? So, we had to make a few choices. So, if we needed to strike a bilateral deal, like many of what I think, people have read, you have to guess which one is actually going to get it to the finishing line. And once you choose one, it means you're excluding the others. And we couldn't put ourselves in that position where we lock ourselves in without all the data having come out. So thankfully, through CEPI that Helen has already spoken about, is that we've shown our hand and said we do have excess capacity that we can make available. Once that can also go into the pool. So I think there are two types of pools. So there's a pool of manufacturers where the developers will make the vaccine available into this pool. And then the likes of Biovac can then manufacture downstream. Okay, and out of that pool, countries can also pool out of that. So yes, we've shown our hand, and we certainly are in the conversation. And we just, obviously everybody's waiting to find out which one is going to make it to phase 3, which ones can we do. And obviously there's a pool that we can only select from, because we only have some capability and not others. But I think there's a big enough list that once the clinical trials are at a stage that is ready, that Biovac can at least be able to produce. But we're already putting preparations together. We're already committing and going at risk on some of the things that we need to do on our machines. So we're already, taking some at-risk investments, because we know that we can't wait for everything to be, we can't wait for all the boxes to be ticked. By that time, it will be too late. So we're already making some, hopefully, safe assumptions and safe investments thus far.
So once it's ready, once they say this is safe, this is ready, what's the time period? Or is it impossible to answer such a question?
Yeah, it's a very difficult question to answer, because each vaccine and each developer is very different. So on some, and let's assume that you have, let's put it simple, let's assume that you have 4 choices. Oh, okay, I can choose between these 4. I can see that I can be able to do it. Now, each of those 4 may have different nuances. Some may say, look, Biovac, we can ship you this. Are you able to are you able to blend it? We say, yeah, we can able to blend it, but maybe we can't blend it at large scale. Others can say, look, I can't send you that because, it's so tricky that I need to blend it myself and send it to you. And those are logistics, in terms of filling and all of that. So I think the technicalities are probably going to determine how rapidly we can come through. I think our earliest indication from what we can read and from a lot of discussions that we've had is that around Q3, Q4, we can certainly go live. Again, pending, technicalities, pending this. So that's probably the earliest that we can go live. And obviously at that time, depending on where the South African government would pool the initial doses for the high-risk patients.
Johnny, may I ask, maybe it's an unfair question to ask you. Is this something that I should be worrying about personally, or is this something that Discovery is worrying about on my behalf?
It's a good question, Howard, and I think the answer is both. I do think that, that Discovery, certainly on behalf of its members, but also working, with government, is doing whatever possible along with, many other actors in the private sector to try and support government, with a national response. I don't think you can expect, given the shortage in the early years that Prof. Rees has mentioned, I don't think you can expect that the private sector, whether it's Discovery members or anyone else, will get privileged access to the vaccine in the early phases of its availability. I think the government is going to set the policy, and for as long as there's not adequate supply, I don't know this officially, but my guess would be the government will decide, who will get priority. And to be honest, that's as it should be. I think, until there's enough for everybody. So if you take the example today of flu vaccines or others, there's generally enough in the country, and people can choose to go in the private sector or the public sector. I think the question I'd like to ask both Helen and Morena is, I think what we all want to know is when, roughly, do we think there'd be enough vaccine supply in South Africa to make sure that everybody who would like to be vaccinated can be? That feels to me like the key question. Having 3%, enough for 3% or enough for 20%, that's not enough. So I don't know. I know that's a tough question back to you guys, but, are we talking about late 2020, 2021? Are we talking about sometime in 2022 or later than that? Because that's also going to determine how long our country is living with this virus and having to manage people, being exposed to being sick. Any thoughts, Helen and Morena, on that question?
Well, I'll have the first go. I mean, I think that we're certainly not talking about the world having enough vaccines for everybody by 2021. And one of the questions on the chat was why, what use is 3 or 20%? The point is that we're going to start somewhere. And if we have limited numbers of vaccines, the first thing, as you said, Johnny, we'll have to do, the government will have to do is say what's the priority. And what seems to be coming out just about in global discussions at the moment is it's very likely, for example, to be healthcare workers. Because A, they can spread the virus to patients. B, they can become infected. We have seen much higher mortalities worldwide with healthcare workers than with other groups of workers. And of course, they can also then transmit into the community. And if they become sick, it's not only COVID that's the patients that are affected, it's all patients. So it's very likely that you're going to have sort of a graduated approach with prioritization, and that's going to be quite country specific. So I think that by I wouldn't think that we would have enough in the world until, I would say, earliest 2022, because of challenges of manufacturing. And I know there's a lot of questions about who should get it and age, and we'll come back and answer that for you as well.
May
I just
we
want
ask
to,
more?
if I, sorry, Howard,
Sorry, Johnny. No, please go ahead.
Helen, I think some members of the audience misinterpreted one of your comments, and I'm keen that we clarify it. So
yes, I saw that.
Yeah, when you mentioned that, you know, when none of us are safe unless we're all safe, and you gave an example. You said, for example, in some countries, some elderly people may not be vaccinated, and then they'll be at risk if people in other countries are, like the whole of Africa is not protected. Some people have heard you saying older people won't be eligible for the vaccine. I think that's not what you meant at all.
No,
you were
I
just
should
giving
have.
an example. Yeah.
Yes. So let me explain, and also some of the other questions about, you know, who goes into clinical trials. To begin with, we take healthy adults, and one of the problems as we get older is that our immune system, like other systems, unfortunately, also weakens. It's not as responsive. So first we want to see in an adult population, and many of the studies you'll see will say 18 to 55 to 60 to under 65, but they won't go above that in the first iteration of these studies, because first you want to see with people, younger people with really robust immune system, is this vaccine going to work? If it does work, then there are trials all lined up to immediately look at vaccine effectiveness in older people. And the reason for that is the mortality is just so much higher. It goes up after the age, it goes up continuously actually, but it goes up much more steeply after the age of 60. So we want to protect, I mean, once you get to over 80, the mortality rate is extremely high. So we want to be able to protect older people with a vaccine ideally, but we might find that some vaccines will not stimulate the immune system of older people, in which case the way to protect older people is to immunize everybody else, because that is the way that you push the virus away and you protect people who are vulnerable. Similarly, in the early clinical trials, we're not taking in people with the comorbidities, the diabetes, hypertension, some of the colleagues were mentioning. But very quickly, we would want to see whether the vaccine is safe in people with other problems. Other people were asking about transplant patients. We would want to see in these groups who are more vulnerable, is the vaccine safe and is it going to work? So as soon as in a healthy adult population, you start to see signs of a potentially effective vaccine, there will be very, very quick transition into looking at vaccine safety and effectiveness in these other groupings.
Can I ask Dr. Makhoana, you mentioned that production would be 15 million or 30 million, but over what period? Is that per year? What's the actual period of the doses? That's question number one. And question number two is, are you capable of making all the different sorts of vaccines? So if, for example, Moderna's RNA vaccine came out as the winner, do we have capacity to make that, or are there only certain vaccines that we have capacity to make within South Africa?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. I think I'd also like to add on to, you know, when is the world going to have enough vaccine for everybody? I think one of the things that we also have to be aware of is that it depends also on the number of doses. So many of you may know flu vaccine, you have one shot a year, and but a lot of the vaccines may require 2 doses. So where you get one shot today and you may need to come back a few weeks later to get a shot. So that also is one of the things that we have to take into consideration, that you may require more than 1 dose, and that in itself limits everybody's capacity to reach just about the whole world. So if you take South Africa and you say you have 60 million population, if we're going to, a lot of the vaccine looks like that 2 dose, which means that you need 120 million doses as a, you know, as a high level figure. So I think with that, coming to your question is that, I don't think any one manufacturer can answer the questions for their own country. I think we've seen that even in the US, so I think we will play our part in terms of, but we're certainly not going to be answering the whole of South Africa's question. And I don't think any manufacturer can answer their country's question. But the volumes that we're talking about is annual doses that we can churn out.
Great. We're going to do a very quick poll now, because one of the issues raised by Professor Rees was, in fact, he who pays, should they get preference? And I'm going to ask Danny to put up, in fact, poll number 2 right now to see about the moral dilemmas that come. And the question is, should the Americans who paid for the vaccine get it first? Answer number 1, yes, they paid for the damn thing. Answer number 2, let's share equally amongst the nations. And answer number 3, let the old and vulnerable get it first, like the Titanic and lifeboats. So as we wait for those results to come in, maybe I can ask Professor Rees. A few people have posed the question, there are trials taking place in South Africa. They haven't reached their full quota yet. So the 2 questions is, number 1, if you're willing to get on a trial, who do you actually apply to? That's question number 1. And number 2, the fact that South Africa has involved itself in 2 of the trials, does that put us further up the queue in order to potentially get more vaccines from those 2 manufacturers?
Well, in terms of who to apply to, I think I better give you some contact details after this, and perhaps you can send it out to your mailing list, because certainly we are looking for volunteers. And what's interesting is that we are getting volunteers from across the social and demographic spectrum. People are keen and interested to contribute. I think people want to feel that they're doing something to respond to this pandemic. And then the second question is you're really touching on an important ethical principle of reciprocity. So if people have put themselves in some ways at risk by participating in trials, and countries have put themselves out to support trials, the ethical principle of reciprocity would say, yes, there is an argument to be made that there should be prioritization given to countries that have done that, and to the participants of trials. Say you have an effective vaccine and others, half the trial participants are on a placebo, that they should also have priority in receiving it because they had actually put themselves out to try and support development. Whether that means anything is problematic. And that's why probably we need these big global efforts beyond just a sort of contractual agreement with say a manufacturer and a clinical trial group, that this would be the case.
So let's in fact share the results of the moral dilemma. You see that about 9% of people said yes, they paid for the damn thing, let them go first. 63% think we should share equally amongst the nations. I can't help believing that that's a little self-serving in the way that we voted. And about 28% of people believe that the old and vulnerable should get it first, exactly like we saw on the Titanic. We're going to show our last advert for the evening, and then we're going to come back, Johnny, to ask a few of your questions. And hopefully, if our 2 doctors and professors are willing, or maybe if I can say our 3 doctors and professors are willing, maybe we can try to pose some of the what looks like about 40 questions that have been asked so far. About 26 of them are still outstanding, maybe in a very quick rapid fire short question, short answer process. If our guests don't mind keeping themselves awake for a little longer to answer some of the very practical questions that people have. But Danny, can you in fact show us the last advert for the evening, one of our great supporters of all of these webinars, and that is Capability BPO. Capability BPO offers a diverse set of BPO services to private and public sector clients, both to domestic and international markets. Debt-In is a private professional services business that specializes in debt recovery and credit control solutions to public and private institutions, operating its own specialist debt collection contact center and creating unique strategies for its clients in order to significantly improve their collection results. Contact Mark Essie, the CEO, who will assist with solutions tailor-made to your specific business requirements, bringing the expertise of his team to your back office. Great, thanks, Danny. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And Johnny, should we delve directly into some of the questions posed by members of the audience? And we have one or two people who are asking about the safety of vaccinations. Helen, is this the sort of thing you would ever personally volunteer for?
I certainly would. But I certainly would be very happy to volunteer for a vaccine trial. One issue for me at the moment is that I'm outside the age group, so I can't, but also because my own institute is enrolling people. So there I would have to go to another entity. I couldn't get my own staff to enroll me for ethical reasons, but I certainly would.
Johnny, maybe I can pose the next question to you. You must be following all the trials taking place at the moment, and there's certainly a number there. What, 2 Chinese vaccinations in third phase trials? There's the Russian vaccination, there's the Morena, there's the Oxford. If you were a betting man, who do you think's leading the race?
It's a very, I'm not a betting man, and I'm not well enough sighted, but just as a pure layperson, Howard, it does look to me, and Helen should really answer this and Morena, but I would guess that the Oxford AstraZeneca candidate is definitely, a very good contender. They had a particular platform, that was much more advanced, that, they were much quicker into trials. I think that, I'm going to say something maybe a little controversial here. I'm thinking that they'd be the lead out of all of those that go through proper safety trials and effectiveness trials. So you're seeing in say, Russia, what I think is quite an early release of the vaccine into parts of the population before those trials are fully completed. That's how I see it. So if you're thinking about, which vaccines will come out after full testing, I think there are many that are leading, but I think the Oxford AstraZeneca one, might just have a head start. But I'd be keen to hear whether Helen and Morena have views and whether they're able to express their views on that.
Morena?
Yeah. So unfortunately, in vaccines, you don't bet. For us, we wait for data. Once the data comes out, it will tell us, because sometimes even post-licensure, you get to learn about the vaccine. So I'd rather wait for the data and be guided by the data.
Helen, that roulette wheel is spinning. Where have you placed your money?
Well, I think clearly the vaccines that are in advance have got into phase 3 clinical trials are obviously in an advanced stage of development. Indeed, we don't know if they're going to work or not. I would say that Oxford was looking good because it had some very good immunogenicity results, better than I think people had anticipated, including after 1 dose. But I think still people are anticipating it will require 2 doses. So I would agree, but I think all of those vaccines that are in phase 3 clinical trials are likely to pass the winning post first, simply because they're more advanced in development. Johnny's point about safety is absolutely critical. I think every single phase of clinical development starts, what are you looking for? You're looking for safety. It's the first word you say. It's safety, immunogenicity, effectiveness, efficacy. So this is a very, very important thing to think about. And as I say, we will also have post-marketing requirements once we get vaccines.
Could I jump in, Howard, and ask Helen to comment on this question, which is, what do we know so far about mutations in this virus? We know the influenza virus mutates very quickly, and virtually every season there's kind of some new strains, and we need a sort of new blend of a vaccine. Are we going to see the same thing with COVID? Are we going to need different blend of vaccines every year. What do you know about the mutations of this virus?
So this virus is mutating much more slowly than, say, an influenza virus, which is good news. But scientists have identified thousands of mutations. There is one that seems to be significant, which is called D614G, and it affects what's the spike protein. You've all seen the picture of the virus with those things sticking up. That's the spike protein, which allows the virus to attach to cells. And this mutation affects that. But whether it has increased transmissibility of the virus, nobody really knows. And it's thought that this also happened quite early on between China and Italy, probably way back. So fortunately, at the moment, the virus is doing very nicely in all our populations. It doesn't have to, it's got no pressure to mutate significantly. So touch wood, we're not seeing major concerns in terms of mutations that are enhancing, for example, transmission.
So sorry, can I just ask a follow-up and then we'll go to Benji. I think we saw this week the first confirmed case of a person getting COVID for the second time, but a different strain of COVID. Are the vaccines likely to cover all the different strains?
Well, you probably wouldn't have noticed this, but many of the vaccines are actually trying to look for the same antigen, the spike protein. So they're all targeting the same bit of the virus. A few are not, and as we get more vaccines, we'll see more diversity in that. So as long as we don't get a major mutation there, what we are not seeing is that varies between one coronavirus and another. It's there and it's constant. And as long as we don't get a mutation that suddenly changes that, these vaccines will work across the coronavirus with different genetic types that we're seeing.
So this is the question from our audience is, I don't know if there's enough research yet, whether someone who has actually been COVID positive, would they need to get a vaccine? Or does the virus stay with you, or there's enough antibodies, whatever?
It's such a good question. It's normally speaking, when we give vaccines, we don't test, I'm just talking about other vaccines. We don't necessarily test everybody to say, have you had that infection? If you've had it, I'm not giving you a vaccine. So we tend to give vaccines at a population level. And that would be what we would intend to do here. Because the other problem is it would be difficult to know what tests to do to find out who had and hadn't been infected. Number one, some people are asymptomatic, quite a large number of people, they might not have had symptoms. Number two, even if we tested for antibodies, they might have had antibodies which might have waned and we couldn't detect them. That doesn't mean that the immune system isn't still primed in some way, but we might not be able to detect antibodies. So I think that it would be, we would be looking to immunize across the board. And it would be a good thing, even if you've had it, to have a vaccine if it's effective.
Can I just say, Benji, sorry if I can interrupt for a moment. I see someone has posted in the questions that they in fact are a volunteer and they've had their second shot this week, and they'd like to know when the results will be available to know if they're on the vaccine or the real thing. I'm going to ask that person if they're willing to raise their hand, and we'll promote you onto the panel for a minute or so to ask you about it, if you're willing to participate. If you're not, absolutely, please don't feel any pressure to do so. But if you do raise your hand now, we will promote you onto the panel to discuss that with you. Sorry, Benj, I interrupted you.
No problem. It's interesting because I read this week that actually they announced that Africa's polio free, and which is like a remarkable achievement, but it's years, it's absolute years. Now, is there anything we can learn from that, or is that the kind of time period that we're going to be stuck, for want of a better word, with COVID?
Well, I mean, it's an incredible achievement. I mean, 30 years ago, there were 4 new cases of paralytic polio occurring worldwide every hour. I mean, and we've gone from there to a handful. We've only got Pakistan and Afghanistan that are now endemic. But polio, of course, is a different kind of virus. I mean, it's spread, it's an oral fecal virus, and so it's spread in that way, as opposed to respiratory, which is COVID. But the reason that we're pushing to try and eradicate polio is that we want to move something that perhaps there are some people who are older here who will remember polio was a terrible, terrible, terrible repeated outbreak, and it paralyzed children and it killed people in numbers and it terrified communities. And we've got to a point where that is not frightening us in the same way in any way. So it's an enormous achievement. In terms of lessons learned, I don't think we realized how difficult it was going to be to eradicate polio. And we haven't eradicated polio from the world because, as I say, we still have wild polio virus in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And as long as we've got it anywhere in the world, it can spread again to people who are not immunized. But I think one of the messages is eradicating something like that is extremely difficult, very, very difficult, because there are reservoirs everywhere, and also because our immunization coverage has simply not been high enough to get rid of polio from some of the most vulnerable populations.
Maybe we can ask Dr. Morena. I see Howard has said, is there any truth that the levels of aluminium in vaccine may be toxic and cause long-term inflammatory responses? I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I think, any vaccine that gets licensed, I think, we should have a surety that the regulatory authorities apply robust scrutiny over those vaccines. And I'm not talking about COVID now, I'm just talking across the board. And so there's a high level of scrutiny, and there's a lot of follow-up that gets done, even when vaccines are 10, 20, 30 years old. So I think we can rest assured that whatever is licensed and out there is certainly being monitored. And if there was to be any scare or anything that would be going out of kilter, I think the regulatory authorities would have been the first to act. So so I think that's the simplest answer I can give on that.
Helen, I'm going to come to you in a moment and ask you a question about, in fact, SAHPRA approval for a vaccine. But before we do that, I'm going to ask Danny to launch poll number 3. And poll number 3 is, in fact, a question of how people believe we as the country have done with COVID. So the question is, how do you think South Africa has done with COVID? First answer is, it's been a bloody disaster. Second answer is, we've actually done much better than I thought. And third answer is, hello from New Zealand, where I'm hiding. But while people fill that out, Helen, SAHPRA will in fact be the organization that will have to give the okay, the licensing and the approval for any vaccine in South Africa. Now, we've certainly seen SAHPRA maybe not move as the fastest body when it's come to that around. Is this something that if the FDA or the European equivalent, the CE, approves it, we will automatically approve it? Or will a vaccine have to go through some sort of South African long-term regulatory approval before emergency use is granted in this country?
So the first thing is, I'll just give a quick plug. SAHPRA has been in existence now for nearly 3 years. And in that time, one of the biggest things we've tackled is this backlog and the delays. And we've made enormous strides. I think that in the last 3 years, we've kind of got SAHPRA really on the right track. And importantly for the country, SAHPRA is a good and a solid regulator. And I think just to go to the point about safety, that's incredibly important. SAHPRA will not allow anything to go onto the market without really rigorous evaluation. SAHPRA has internal staff, but we also have external evaluators who are drawn from, the academic best that we have in the country. So it will indeed have very rigorous evaluation. But the third thing I just want to say is that everything COVID in SAHPRA at the moment is fast-tracked. And SAHPRA has been overlooking not only therapeutics and vaccines, and the clinical trials are all approved, but has also been looking at the PPE, the respirators, the ventilators, the antibody tests, the lab tests. SAHPRA has had an enormous behind-the-scenes contribution and has really worked flat out, and everything is fast-tracked.
Fantastic. So just to share the poll results with you quickly, 15% of people believe that in fact it's been a complete bloody disaster. 84% have said we've actually done much better than I thought, and only 4 people are currently hiding in New Zealand, hiding away from us. I see Simon had his hand up, and I'm not sure if that means he's the individual who in fact has gone through the process of testing. Vaccine testing. He's one of the volunteers. So Simon, if you are, I've promoted you to the panel. If it is in fact you, then please turn on your camera. We'd love to chat to you. If not, I'm going to put you back into the audience. Maybe you mistakenly put up your hand, but I'll leave you there for about 10 seconds. Benji, select for us your favorite question, and then I'm going to ask all of our panelists to select their favorite questions that are appearing in the Q&A.
I think to everyone, whoever feels like answering it, is that, do you think the conversations with government, you were very clear that government was going to make the decision on who's going to get the vaccine. Do you think the conversations with government, that government are asking the right people to guide them and to get the right advice on like your idea on health workers? Is there enough consultation going on?
Maybe I should answer that, because Helen is one of the government's chief advisors, so she'll be commenting on herself if she answers that question. And I think the short answer, Benji, is definitely yes. I mean, this has been, I think, a model paradigm of public-private cooperation in dealing with this epidemic, unusually so in my view. And the government very early on, the Department of Health, but not only the Department of Health, many departments set up expert advisory panels that pulled in, the country's best scientists from right across the spectrum. And the Ministerial Advisory Committee in Health has literally all the country's, best brains and scientists on it from many different disciplines, including Helen. And, it's in sharp contrast, by the way, to many countries far more sophisticated than us, like the United States and the UK and many others, where the entire process has been far more politicized. I think we should give all credit to the government for having really, in a sense, listened very carefully. Not every decision's been uncontroversial. There's been obviously a huge amount of debate about cigarettes and alcohol, and I don't think we should get into that here. Yeah. But they have definitely set up and taken advice from, the country's best, as far as I can tell.
That's fantastic. I must say that as a layman, I've felt that we've had this very coordinated response. And when you hear like America, how political it has become. So I just want to say, as I know we're going around, just to the Prof, thank you so much. And on behalf of all of us, it's just been a remarkable thing to be held by such brilliant minds. And it's such a model for us going forward on how to all work together.
So Morena, tell us, did you select a favorite question out of the Q&A section?
Well, there are so many questions to answer there, but I think just to follow on this past conversation, I think, South Africa is a middle-income country, and I think, I think the best competitor that people should do is other middle-income countries in terms of the expertise, but also in terms of the decision-making. And I think, it's always good. You can look at the US, we can look at the UK, we can look at whoever, all the big countries. But I think if you put us on the par with the countries that are on our level, I think we certainly come up in terms of decision-making, taking public health interest, and so I think people should have the confidence in the decisions that are yet to be made, particularly in terms of vaccine rollout.
Helen, your favorite question to answer?
Well, I'll take a new one, because some people are saying, are we distracting ourselves because the mortality isn't as high as perhaps we'd worried about? And should we be having so much focus on this, and is it going to be, at the neglect of other conditions? So what I would say is this, 80% of people are going to be asymptomatic or have mild disease, but 20% are going to be seriously ill. As people get older, we're going to have really significant mortalities, comorbidities. What we're seeing in South Africa is the comorbidities are really driving our death rate, and we're seeing it in younger ages. So each country is going to see something different. But I, in fact, got a message from somebody who went very public with his COVID, a man called Peter Peart, who heads the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and he was very sick. I just got a message from him today saying people underestimate how nasty this virus is. What we're also seeing is what's called the long haul syndrome, that for people, particularly people who've had a more severe infection, but sometimes even with milder infections, persistent, really disabling symptoms, really bad fatigue, just exercise intolerance, chest pains. So this thing, for many people, leaves a long residual recovery. And in some cases, we're going to see permanent damage. There are many reasons why it's not just an average mortality rate. And if this thing keeps circulating, we cannot keep opening and shutting economies. We need to close it down.
Johnny, I think an interesting thing from our community is that as of about 2 weeks ago, the death rate within the Jewish community was sitting at 106 confirmed COVID cases, mortality cases. We are 0.09% of the population. That would make our community 11 times more liable to die from COVID than the general South African population. Now, I think there could be a number of reasons for this. The one is we have an older population than the general South African population. I think a second reason for this is I think we're accurately reporting our COVID deaths because almost everyone is in the private healthcare sector, and therefore we don't have an excess mortality rate the way the rest of the country does. And of course, the third thing is that sometimes our community just doesn't listen and thinks that the laws don't apply to them. But our percentage mortality rates are much higher than the general population. So it's very, very dangerous, in fact, to presume that this is just a mild disease that passes with little impact. We've seen the impact ourselves on our own community.
Yeah, and I think, Howard, if there's one message to end this excellent webinar with, it is how seriously we should ask everybody in this country still to take this virus. It's testing all of our reserves of patience, and everyone's sick and tired of this and wants to get back to living normal life. But I think what we heard from Helen and Morena earlier is, this is a marathon. We're not likely to be entirely safe from this until sometime in 2022. That means 18 to 24 months from now, if then. And until that time, although we're now fortunately in a phase where there's much lower number of new cases, the risk is going to be there, and people need to continue to exercise, great caution and act very responsibly. Because as Helen says, this thing, statistically, you may think you're safe if you're young, but you don't know if you're the one who gets the very bad infection. So I think that's a very, very important lesson or message to take away from this at the end.
Helen, if I could pose my last question to you, Benji may have a final question as well, but my last question to you is, when do you think we'll see the first commercially available vaccines? It doesn't mean to say we'd get our hands on them or that it would be in large supply, but are we realistically looking over the next few months or before the end of the year for us to see commercially available effective COVID vaccines on the market?
People are pushing very hard, and as we said earlier on, the Oxford vaccine is pushing as quickly as it possibly can. But I think it's going to be unlikely that we would have commercial vaccine this year. But I would hope that we might start to see small quantities if we do get a successful vaccine in the first, perhaps the second quarter of next year, and then incrementally increasing. I would be surprised if we got very surprised if we got a commercially available vaccine this year.
So Donald Trump's promise of the 3rd of November, which mysteriously happens to be the American election date, maybe not too realistic.
Yes, and I did see someone asked about chloroquine as well, and hydroxychloroquine. Just on that one quickly, there isn't, sadly there was a lot of enthusiasm for both treatment and prevention with hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, but unfortunately all the studies have been very disappointing, and these have been properly conducted studies. So, you know, we might wish for things, but we need the evidence, and it's incredibly important to generate that evidence first.
Benji?
Maybe just to finish off, it's more of a statement. We had this remarkable webinar with Judge L.B. Sachs, and he discussed when it came to the vaccine, he said it's going to be one of the biggest humanitarian questions of our generation on how we deal with it. And, you know, he's a remarkable thinker. And just when I see the kind of people leading it, you, Johnny, Morena, you, Professor, I really feel like we're going to answer that question in a way that would have made Madiba proud and way that makes our country proud. And it's just been such an honor to be with all of you. And Johnny, thank you so much for your effort in putting this together. And hopefully we can all answer that question. Hopefully that we answer the humanitarian question of our generation, maybe.
So to all of our remarkable panelists, thank you. You are unsung heroes of South Africa.
Definitely.
And let us make sure that we, at least the thousands of people who've watched us this evening, understand the contribution that all of you have really made to keeping us all safe and alive during this unbelievable period. So to Professor Rees, a huge thank you. To Dr. Morena Makhoana, thank you so much. Johnny Broomberg, thank you for everything that you're doing for all of us. Really, it's been such a privilege to spend this evening with all of you. I know we haven't got to everyone's questions. We would like you very much to leave us a comment in the comment section of the chat. We'll share all of those comments with all of the panelists, but we hope you found this evening enlightening, inspiring, and we really should be so proud that we have such remarkable minds and such amazing talent within South Africa itself. So to our panelists, a huge thank you. To all of you who watched us tonight, really appreciate it. We'll see you again on Saturday evening, where we'll be discussing people's remarkable stories about their own life. We're going to, in fact, play out once again with our shofar blowing competition. Please remember, webinars at sajuicereport.co.za. Send in your application for our competition. Let's play that out, but please don't forget, please leave us a comment, and we'll see you all again on Saturday evening. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So we'll leave the chat open for another few minutes so you can leave us a message. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Benji, I just got a message from the United Kingdom, and someone said, just what an absolute honest, no politics, genuine, informative webinar.
So funny you say that. I got a WhatsApp from a friend of mine overseas, and he said that this is the only country that could happen where that conversation happens. And I really think, as I said at the end, I think it's so lucky to have those kind of people leading such an important job. And I actually think they'll pull it off. They'll pull it off. They'll decide. I feel comfortable that they'll decide in a moral, humanitarian way. And South Africa, you know, as Robbie Brosen says, has the Rebbe's brocha, and we're very lucky. We're very lucky to have this level of leadership and professionalism around.
Fantastic. So we'll leave the chat open for another minute or two. Please leave us a comment. We'll see you on Saturday evening. Have a good night and stay safe. Stay
sanitized.
Stay sanitized. Stay safe. And
wear a mask.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.